lawmakers, and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, opposition lawmakers in South Korea are calling for President Yoon to be impeached after he plunged the nation into a political crisis by briefly imposing martial law. Now, for more on all of this, let's bring in Bloomberg's Katya Dmitrieva. Katya, I mean, there's so many questions about what comes next. But first of all, do we really understand why he called martial law in the first place?
The answer is no. We don't know exactly. We can't get inside his head. But we do have some idea. President Yoon had said that it was really to get after some of the North Korean elements in Parliament and sort of a safety measure to ensure that the country can continue and democracy can continue in the country, which is why martial law is usually imposed. It's usually something imposed during wartime, for example, and that's usually when it does get imposed. In this case, however, it was imposed after, and he did it in the nighttime address last night from Seoul, and it was coming at a time when he has record low favorability ratings and also has opposition that has been calling for a lot of investigations into him and family members. And so this is why it really caught a lot of people off guard. This is why we had protesters immediately in the streets and why lawmakers gathered very closely afterwards, very shortly afterwards, and passed this resolution, this 190 votes to lift the martial law.
So what will happen today? And I guess markets are recovered somewhat, but could there be a longer lasting hit to the economy and to how the country is perceived?
Yes, absolutely. So the cost be end of the day about 1% down. The currency is also quite weak. It was already for the year the weakest in Asia. And longer term, this is certainly expected to weigh on consumer sentiment, things like investor sentiment. So we saw in previous times in South Korea during these sorts of political events, people just spend less. They tend to save more. There's a lot of uncertainty. And the next kind of 24 to 48 hours is also an open question because there could be a different president. The president could be impeached. And there are a few candidates that we reported on who could fill that role. But it's still a big question mark.
Katya, thanks so much. As always, Katya Dmitrieva there for us, following very closely what's happening in South Korea. Now, Bloomberg also spoke exclusively to the Bank of Korea Governor Rhee Chang-yong. He told Bloomberg's Aslinda Amin that the impact from the martial law order was short-lived and the political turmoil is unlikely to result in more rate cuts.
It's a relief that the impact of the market was short-lived. While it is still true that it's hard to predict the political dynamics, but I believe that the economic dynamics in Korea can be separated from the political dynamics, given our strong market fundamentals and also the matured democracy.
So do you think you've done enough so far?
No, what is enough is actually I'm very happy that the impact has been short-lived. Definitely, we have to see how these political events will evolve. In the meantime, we focus on providing ample liquidity to stabilize the market. And when we look at the market, we do not see any malfunctioning. So, but on the other hand, we by expecting that in preparation for the future possible financial unrest, we actually strengthened our liquidity injection facilities, such as increasing our repo purchase agreement and also extending our eligible securities for open market operation. And so far it's okay. So far it works well. Yeah.
So far, so good. But in my conversation with the former trade minister of Korea, he did talk about how he's expecting prolonged political uncertainties. How prepared is the BOK for that?
Actually, I watched your program. Actually, I think he was more concerned on the other structural factors, not only this prolonged the political issue. But I think it's not yet decided. It's very hard to predict which options the political process will evolve. But I think you know that the Korean government officials are well trained. We are well experienced in handling the several difficulties. So I think while in government in transition or while in this transition period, which we believe couple of months, I think we have many tools and talented government officers to handle this macroeconomic situation.
Well, the Bank of Korea Governor there, Rhee Chang-yong, speaking to our very own Haslinda Amin. Now, to France now, another political turmoil. President Macron has called on French lawmakers to set aside their personal ambition and reject a vote that would topple the government. With the far-right leader, Marine Le Pen has vowed to support today's no-confidence motion called by a left-wing coalition. Together, the two groups have enough votes for the motion to pass.
I hope so, and it's indeed possible. It depends on the members of the National Assembly, each whom has a responsibility to the French people, to the voters of their constituency, and before France too, which is at a rather serious moment.
Now, for more on France, we're joined by Claudia Panseri, Chief Investment Officer for France at UBS Wealth Management. Claudia, I mean, we've seen a lot of political turmoil. We've seen spreads widen with Germany. We've seen actually some of the bond yields touching records that we saw in Greece. How does this end?
Hopefully it ends well, but unfortunately uncertainty remains pretty high. I think the uncertainty will keep going until the end of the year, and we need to see what's going on with the budget for 2025. The worst solution, I think there is always a positive outcome. We may see the 2024 budget to be replicated in 2025. It's sure that the deficit will not improve, but at least there will be some stability and there is no government shutdown. It's not like in the States, so there is always a solution. That is something we are expecting, at least.
How would you position markets right now, Claudia? I imagine you got a lot of calls from a lot of clients saying, I'm not sure what to invest. Do I take my money out? Do I go to cash? What's been your main advice to them?
Stay invested in U.S. assets. There is so much low visibility around European assets so far, even if valuations are pretty appealing, not only across equities, but also on some sovereign bond. I think for the time being, growth in the U.S. stocks are delivering good profit. In Europe, valuations are attractive, but at least until February the next year, we have an election in Germany, visibility is pretty low. So for the time being, U.S. stocks, sovereign, there is more appealing as well on the investment grade bonds. Sovereign in U.S. are appealing as well. So I think there is a way to stay invested, creating some opportunity if the market get under pressure. But for the time being, U.S. assets are still the most favored in our asset allocation.
Claudia, what's a good entry point for French assets?
Oh my God, I think you need to be very selective. French bonds on the short tenor, so the very short yield are already appealing. Spread have been widening on all the yield curve. I will not touch the long end because the risk is to see the spread to the bond widening again. There is a tipping point where you can start buying, but still too early. On the French asset and equities in particular, there is the market didn't make a big discrepancy between what is really impacted by slowing growth and cutting costs. Everything which is also exposed to US has been underperforming. So I think there is already some opportunity to stock pick and make the selection, to make the distinction between what is exporting to US, what is doing, what is cheap, and what is impacted by slowing growth and uncertainty. The market didn't make such a distinction yet. Banks have been under pressure, insurers have been under pressure, luxury goods, every single stocks in the CAC as a premium relative to European peers. So selectivity, but there are some opportunity already.
Claudia, I know you're very, very cautious on France right now. I mean, and I don't really know how to ask you this question because you almost have to be a really political science to do this. But do you have to become a more political scientist to understand what it means for French stocks? I mean, whatever happens today, if there's a vote of no confidence, if we see the government collapse, does it bring Marine Le Pen closer to a presidency? And what does that mean for investors in 12 to 18 months?
I mean, you know how it works. Geopolitical risk and political risk always impact in the market, but the impact is always very short term. So every sell-off which is not fundamental justified should be an entry point. We are concerned about France, but we don't think it's a drama. There are solutions. Once again, if the government fails today, another government will be elected. The budget, the 2024 budget, can be used for 2025 as a template. Of course, the deficit will be still around -6% relative to the GDP. But even in that case, France is a big country with financial assets. The market is very stable. Some companies are more exposed to outside than locally. So I think despite all what's going on geopolitically speaking, and despite the fact that the government may fail today, it's not a drama. The spread will probably widen a bit more, but I don't think the spread will widen as much to keep people concerned about liquidity. The French bonds are quite important in the asset of institutional actors, and this institutional actor will find opportunity to re-enter the French debt because there is confidence in this country, and I think there are enough assets to cover the debt over long term. Of course, it's a steady, slow process. It will take time, but it's still one of the biggest countries in the world with a big GDP, with liquidity, and so we also have a European Commission and the Central Bank, which may jump into it and help in the case of big volatility.
Claudia, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Claudia Panseri, their Chief Investment Officer for France at UBS Wealth Management. Coming up, our interview with Arthur Delaporte, a member of French Parliament and the Socialist Party, a part of the left-wing coalition that submitted today's vote of no confidence. So we continue our coverage on France and South Korea. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back, everyone. This is The Pulse. We're fully on French watch. We're also fully actually on South Korean watch. Now, Emmanuel Macron has called on French lawmakers actually to set aside their personal ambition and really try to reject this vote that would topple the government and throw the country into political turmoil. This is what some of the French assets are doing. So the French 10-year yield at 2.915, 30-year 3.430. Again, the far-right leader Marine Le Pen and her National Rally Party have really vowed to support this no-confidence motion that has been submitted by a left-wing coalition. So we could see a toppling of the government today in France. That first vote of no confidence at 3:30 p.m. UK time. Well, Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta is outside the National Assembly in Paris. Kriti, over to you.
Francine, thank you so much. As you pointed out, this is a crucial day for French politics, a potentially historic one, a no-confidence motion that could pass, and hasn't really even been put forward since going all the way back to 1962. If it indeed does pass, Michel Barnier will be the shortest prime minister serving in modern French history. So you can see why this is, of course, crucial. But at the heart of it is who actually takes part in the vote. The Socialist Party is a key piece of that coalition in terms of that getting that no confidence vote across the finish line. I'm joined now right here in Paris outside the National Assembly with none other than Arthur Delaporte, an MP for the Socialist Party, of course, here in Paris. A pleasure to have you on the program. Arthur, thank you so much for joining me. Let's start with the news here. Let's start with the newsiest thing I can find. And that, of course, is the former Prime Minister Gabriel Attal talking about proposing a pact of non-aggression, saying that maybe we can all get together and ensure there is no confidence vote for whoever comes next. Where do you stand on that?
We say about the same thing. We want a kind of confidence agreement, which would say that we all agree that the next government will not be using ways like Michel Barnier did last year, Monday, to pass bills without votes in parliaments. If we agree on that, if we agree that the parliament will be respected, then we could have a government without any no confidence vote. And then we will have, and Socialists want a left government with this kind of confidence agreement with all the Republican parties in France.
some would argue that's a very attainable goal, that you could have a left-leaning government if you don't go skew too far left. What do you say to that?
Today, the France Insoumise doesn't want to kind of participate to this negotiation to reach a kind of agreement of confidence. And maybe tomorrow, if France Insoumise stays on this position, they won't be part of any government. So we could have, yes, a left government without France Insoumise because they don't want it, but we could have the support or the non-confidence vote from the Macronist or the right.
But it sounds like that you're quite tied to this coalition that you've formed with the far left. What's the deal breaker there?
There's no deal breaker, but today we have a situation. We can't have snap elections without waiting for the 8 months. Yes. So we have today a situation. We have to deal with it. We have to make a new government, to support a new government, because we have to make a new budget for
but some would
the
argue
next year.
that stance of yours, the one where you are allied with the NFP, for example, hurts some credibility for the Socialist Party that could advance that goal. Do you not see it that way?
I don't see it like it because we are elected with a coalition, which was the NFP. So we have this program, this platform, and people voted for us to try to implement this platform. But we have to negotiate in Parliament. And everyone has to know that if we negotiate, we can reach some of the part of the program, but we can't make all the program. And the France Insoumise wants all the program, but it's impossible. So we have to make what is possible, but we can't do the impossible.
Fair. I will grant you that one. Let's talk about what comes next year. If this no confidence vote does indeed pass, the odds are looking like that will be the case. Who should Emmanuel Macron instill as a caretaker prime minister for the sake of the French people? What name comes to mind?
I can't say any name because if I say a name, Macron can say, oh, well, that's Jean-Luc Mélenchon's name. But this is not my goal. My goal is to reach an agreement in Parliament. And if we have this agreement, then Macron can say, okay, I have this basis for the next coalition, and then make me can find a name, an MP or anyone else that could be the representative of this agreement.
Walk us through what happens in 3 months' time, in 6 months' time. The possibility of a snap election, as opposed to waiting until 2027, what's more damaging?
I think that we have to avoid snap election. We have to work with the parliament. We have to make a stable government because today Michel Barnier failed. He failed because he never negotiated with the left wing. So this is a major failure, and we have to change the way we are working and to find a way to have a parliamentary function. To make our institutions function with a stable parliament. But Emmanuel Macron and Michel Barnier think they are still in a presidential regime, then they can do what they want. Today, things have changed. Parliament is here, and they have to listen.
Arthur, I'm confused because I'm hearing you say that we need to negotiate in Parliament, we need to do this through the National Assembly, and yet the coalition is split into thirds. A coalition that socialists are very much a part of, that third piece. So if you split apart from their current coalition, you have more ability to negotiate and get to the goals you're talking about.
But there's no split of the coalition. There's a thing that we can negotiate with the other, and we are not in a real coalition. We have the same platform. We have been elected in the same, I would say, movement, the Nouveau Front Populaire, but then each party is independent, and each party can, and the ecologists, the communists, the socialists are saying about the same. We are saying we have to negotiate with the other. We have to be in office, but then we have to negotiate with the others.
So as those negotiations happen and the working out of the details happens, at the start of 2025, the likelihood of Emmanuel Macron needing to pass this budget via the special law, what does that do?
I think we will have a special law in the next few weeks without maybe a new government. Maybe it can take weeks to have a new government. Maybe it can take even months. But Michel Barnier will still stay in office, maybe as a prime minister, within the next few weeks, and he can pass the special law.
But invoking that law triggers a very important constitutional question about whether or not you can push those emergency powers. How is that being viewed? How dire is the situation that emergency law needs to be used?
We are ready to vote a special law. We are ready, and we will have to vote the special law, for instance, to make some details of the taxation evolve for the next year. So we will do this, and there's no problem about this. There will be any because today Michel Barnier is making fear of French people. Yesterday he was a bit anxious and making people anxious. But the reality is that we are a stable regime, we have strong institutions, we have a strong constitution, and tomorrow we will be responsible. And we will vote this special law, even though we don't have a prime minister, a stable prime minister.
Arthur Delaporte, always a pleasure. Joining me here right outside the National Assembly, this idea of what could actually be very much at stake for the Constitution, what concessions could be made, and what really happens in the next couple of weeks, Francine. The idea that France will, one, not have a prime minister, maybe in 24 hours, and two, actually enact this special law, a truly historic moment right here in Paris.
Kriti, thank you so much. Yeah, we've seen plenty of volatility in Europe over the last couple of years. Kriti Gupta for us in Paris. Salesforce also reporting better than expected quarterly revenue driven by optimism around its artificial intelligence products and strategy. You can see on the back of that, Salesforce getting some 12.2%. Another story we're keeping an eye on, Campari naming industry veteran Simon Hunt as its new chief executive after the abrupt departure of Matteo Fantacchiotti after just a few months at the helm. Hunt has over 30 years of experience in the spirits industry across international markets, notably in the U.S. Campari gaining some 4.3%. And then a couple of other things we're looking out for in South Korea. The defense chief offering to resign over the martial law. Again, we spoke to our reporter on the ground, still quite complicated to understand what happened. I think you're looking at live pictures of protests there on the ground. Plenty more on South Korea next. This is Bloomberg. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, and these are your top stories. Turmoil in South Korea. The opposition calls for the president's impeachment after he plunged the nation into crisis by imposing and then lifting martial law. Well, the French government teeters on the brink of collapse as lawmakers prepare to vote in a no-confidence motion. And political uncertainty tests South Korean and French assets, with gold edging higher. So South Korea's whirlwind stint under martial law has jolted markets. Meanwhile, traders are also watching developments in France with the government on the brink of collapse. So we're now joined by Maria Municchi, M&G Investment Fund Manager. Maria, thank you for joining us. I mean, it seems that political turmoil, or certainly political instability, uncertainty, can kind of come out of nowhere at the moment.
Absolutely. I think, what we've observed in Korea this morning was pretty unexpected. We've seen market reacting to that in quite a well-behaved fashion, though, I will say. I think they are, managing the volatility in a sensible way. We haven't seen really panic in Korean assets at large. Nonetheless, we are facing quite an important political crisis, so we will have to watch carefully how this develops in the coming days.
I mean, and again, we struggle to understand exactly why martial law wasn't paused. So again, it's quite difficult to understand the first intent of the president. Will there be any long-term, lasting impact on assets of South Korea?
Well, I think that's a very important question for markets to wait upon. And I think what we can say and that we have observed is that there has been in Korean equities in general, already quite a lot of weight in terms of market confidence not being very strong. We've seen the market underperforming quite significantly other markets this year. We've continued to see valuations being very cheap on a relative standpoint, given some of the quality of the companies within the index. So that was going to be the key question to understand. Is that going to add additional risk and is going to hamper confidence of investors going forward? I think what we are seeing, it's a starting point where valuations are quite attractive, where we see strong companies that are key players on a global scale. I mean, we see Samsung, SK Hynix, very strong players in the market. They have struggled this year, especially if we look at Samsung and trying to build capacity and trying to keep up with innovation. But nonetheless, they're very important players on a global scale. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how much this political crisis might turn into an economic crisis and then affect those companies. But from what we've heard also from the governor of the central bank this morning, it feels like things from an economic standpoint are still very much under control, and they are pacing their monetary policy in a way that is in line with what was expected.
Yeah, we were kind of joking that it's always up to the central bank to mop up some of the political mess left by heads of state. Maria, talk to me a little bit about France. So this, frankly, is not the first turmoil that France has even seen this year. If you put that into context, do you stay away from French assets, or is there a good entry point?
Well, I think, again, in an interesting way, there is certainly a political crisis developing, but the effect on assets hasn't been as pronounced. We have seen decline in value. We have seen the widening on the spreads on the French bonds versus German bonds. We have seen French equities underperforming of late, but it's not signaling panic per se. And some of those trends we have observed already since the middle of this year. So we've seen the CAC underperforming the DAX quite significantly for an extended period of time. So I think, again, the markets are behaving quite reasonably and waiting what the importance of these events are in markets for what we can know today. That doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities on a more stock-picking basis, especially within the French equity space. But nonetheless, I think, again, the response has been quite measured. So there isn't a pure tactical opportunity at the moment in these assets. But I think if we look longer term, on a medium to long-term basis, there is some value in those areas that could start to be interesting.
But do you suggest your clients just look elsewhere, i.e. the U.S., given there could be a Trump trade that further lifts some of the equities?
Well, I think a lot of the, in terms of, investors' positioning for a continued rally in U.S. equities has unveiled, and there is probably quite a lot of it in the price of U.S. equities already. Obviously, we are in an environment where it's not just the price that has moved in favor of U.S. equities, but also fundamentals have been supporting this. We've seen, earnings continue to do very well. We have potentially some policies that will continue to help the U.S. exceptionalism going forward, being taxation, being, the push for innovation and, the ability to compete in global markets for these companies. But nonetheless, I think we have to be a bit cautious in that regard because valuations are stretched in some areas of the U.S. equity markets. So I think what will be more interesting going forward is to have a more diversified approach to assets that have more attractive valuations, especially in a medium to long-term view. But there is still a possibility that U.S. equities will continue to outperform in the short term. But I think it's important to also not lose sight of what valuation is telling us relatively to other markets. If you look at history, it has been a good indicator of future performance on a longer period of scale, so 5 to 10 years. So we cannot forget that.
Yeah, and Maria, I guess, are we also forgetting sometimes that if there are trade tariffs that could be even more aggressive than 10 to 20%, then the global economy could have a significant downfall, and that doesn't seem to be priced in at all.
Completely. I think, when we think about tariff, the market has tended to look at the first-level consequence of those tariffs, which are potentially beneficial for the U.S., etc., or slightly inflationary as well. But there hasn't been yet, an effort to move to the second-level consequence of those tariffs and what that could be for global markets and for the global trade. And I think, depending on how those tariffs will work out, I think that will be an important area to look for investors to try and understand how the dynamics around global trade might change as well. So, for example, countries that today are seen as strong losers from those tariffs might actually find a way out of it that will benefit them.
Maria, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. Maria Municchi, their M&G investment fund manager. Now, the political uncertainty, of course, extends to Eastern Europe, where Georgia's constitutional court has also rejected a challenge to the results of October's parliamentary election filed by the country's president. This comes after violent clashes in the capital were sparked by the ruling party's decision to delay EU membership talks until 2028. Well, I asked President Zurabishvili whether she'll resign.
The situation is not linked to, first of all, I don't have to resign. I have a mandate which goes until a new president is inaugurated. Their president is going to be inaugurated by the end of the month. It's not an election that is recognized by the population. So I will continue to represent the voice of the people that want their vote back, their future back, their European future back. And I will stay, which doesn't mean that it's not an alternative power, because I don't have any power. I'm staying in the constitutional framework completely, again, despite what the official propaganda is trying to portray. But there has to be someone that is the voice of the nation that wants to keep its European future. And I intend to continue to do that, and to be also the contact point for our partners, our European and American partners, for the media, the voice of the people.
President, as you say, the current wave of protests is quite big but decentralized. Could you help in actually forming more institutional, so that information goes into one direction, so that everything's processed in a more cohesive way?
No, because there is no way in which it's not my role as a president, and if I wanted to have that role, I couldn't exert it, to be the organizer of the protest. What I can be is a bridge, a relay, in case the authorities want to open some form of dialogue with the people that are protesting on the streets when that time, and if that time comes. I'm the bridge between the people that are protesting and the outside world, because I can express their demands, and I have the trust of our partners abroad. But I certainly cannot organize, I cannot stop, I cannot accelerate. All that is in the hands of the people, and it's very, that is linked to this decision of the Constitutional Court. When you close one by one all the possibilities, what you are doing, in fact, is increasing the frustration of the people that are on the streets, and everybody knows that the increased frustration can then lead to anything.
Well, that is the president of Georgia, Salome Zurabishvili, speaking to me earlier. Now, coming up, the UK stock market shrinking at the fastest pace in over a decade as companies get snapped up in takeovers. We discuss that next, and this is Bloomberg. Company takeovers are causing a record number of delistings from the London Stock Exchange, with 45 firms leaving the market this year due to M&A. Now let's bring in our Bloomberg senior equity markets reporter, Michael Municchi. Michael, thank you so much. I mean, there's so much actually going on. When you look at the health of the UK financial sector, I mean, should we worry? We see this headline and you kind of think, oh, what's happening to London?
Well, Francine, actually, this is bad for the UK market because it's shrinking, but it's been shrinking for a while. But that also tells you that it's an attractive market for foreign bidders, at least. You have a market that is trading at a very heavy discount to global peers, whether you look at it globally or whether you look at it on a sector basis. So you have like a lot of companies that are actually very good companies with broad exposure, and that you can take over at a cheap price. So our losses is kind of other people's gains.
Yeah, but the concern is that, I mean, if you're the LSE, if you're also regulators, if you're like authorities, you want to attract companies here to list. I know there's like, and we do it a lot on the In the City podcast, trying to figure out what some of the rules and regulations are. Like, how are they thinking about it?
So it's been an ongoing problem, but like for a very long time. This market has been de-equitized, as we say it, for a long time, because there's a lack of IPO, there's a lot of M&A, there's a lack of confidence into the UK regulation, into UK regulations as well. You have to know that pension funds, for example, have been selling UK equities for years because they were told to do so. So you had like all these flows coming out of the UK equity market. That is making it more vulnerable, shrinking, and the regulators have to do something to bring back those flows. So maybe by helping with IPOs, which is what they've been doing, like loosening the rules for IPOs to attract more companies into the UK market. But also, they need to re-attract the flows from mutual funds, the flows from retail investors. And that hasn't really been addressed. And that's probably the next step.
So what's the right way to think about it? I mean, we know that platforms such as Robinhood kind of use this as a template also for the rest of Europe. So there is more stuff happening in London than other Central Europe. Yes,
there is. And this is all, the right path, but it's way too early to tell if it's going to have like a big impact. I think confidence needs to come back. And maybe there will be like some kind of virtuous circle bringing back the flows into the market. But at the moment, we're still having a shrinking market with depressed valuation, and that needs to change. Okay, thank you so much for the update. I mean, some really great, interesting stories on the Bloomberg terminal that are getting a lot of readership right now. So we'll also push it out on social media. Bloomberg's senior equity markets reporter, Michael Msika. Coming up, we'll have the latest from South Korea as the president faces a formal impeachment proposal. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Well, the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has welcomed the South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol's announcement to lift martial law. Now, Yoon's decision to rescind the order just 6 hours later came after a unanimous vote by the National Assembly to reject his declaration. Let's get more with Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. Kevin, I have so many questions, and frankly, there are very little answers at the moment. Do we know why he called martial law?
Well, as best we can tell, it seems to be just sort of an effort to try to stay in power and try to push some things through that were being blocked by the opposition. But I think ultimately it just looks like an enormous sign of weakness and really alarmed and sort of shocked the rest of the world, including a lot of its allies who are sort of now questioning, a little bit the reliability of democracy there, although obviously the democratic process seems to have prevailed there. But, as we're looking for toward the transition in the United States with Donald Trump becoming president, it's a very tough moment for South Korea, which had already been worried about what Trump might do to sort of change policy vis-a-vis North Korea.
Kevin, thank you so much. Kevin Whitelaw there with the very latest. I think we'll have plenty more, of course, on this analysis on the political crisis unfolding in Korea. We're also joined by Edward Howell, Korea Foundation Fellow at Chatham House Asia Pacific Program. Edward, I mean, following on what Kevin was saying, I guess the concern is that is this a president gone rogue? Is there, real concern out there? And what does that mean for the next 24 hours?
So the initial announcement of martial law was very surprising and very shocking and caught South Korea and the world by surprise. It lasted only around about 6 hours, but I think the end is not yet nigh. We've already seen earlier in the last few minutes the fact that the South Korean defense minister has offered to resign, and other senior presidential staff have also tendered their resignations. I think this highlights how President Yoon is in a very precarious situation because his popularity was already very, very low, around about 17% in November. And my concern is that yesterday's events will have lasting implications. It's a sort of own goal for the president because this is going to catalyze even further backlash on the part of those who oppose his policies, particularly on the political left.
But I guess the concern, Edward, is that, could this happen again? And we've seen markets really, feeling the jitters. I mean, there was a special Bank of Korea also meeting where they talked. They didn't need to, but they talked about possibly intervening. Will there be long-lasting legacies because of this?
I think so. I think we need to bear in mind that South Korea has been no stranger to protests in the past, whether it's the walkout of the junior doctors recently, or in recent memory, the impeachment and ultimate removal of power of the former South Korean president Park Geun-hye. This incident, yesterday's incident, though, I think highlights how South Korean politics is very fragile and polarized. And I'm not just talking about the division between the ruling party and the opposition party, but even within the ruling party, the ruling People Power Party. Okay, we did see immediately after Yoon announced the imposition of martial law, the fact that the head of the ruling party said that the move was wrong. So there's a lot to be recovered here. And this is particularly concerning at a time when there is a need for unity. And what do I mean by this? By this, I mean there is a need for South Korea to unite, to work with its allies, with the United States, with Japan, because North Korea's threat is not abating. It's getting worse. It's getting increasingly belligerent. The economic coercion and political coercion from China as well is also not abating. So the fact that domestic political polarization is taking place in South Korea means that this might hinder South Korea's more robust foreign policy.
But what do we know about China's role in this, actually? I mean, you mentioned China. It was interesting because we wrote a couple of pieces on what this could mean also for how this could influence foreign policy of the U.S. going forward.
Predominantly, this is a domestic matter, but obviously domestic and foreign policy domains are inextricably linked, and particularly in East Asia. And I think that one response to look out for is actually from North Korea. You know, North Korea hasn't yet commented on this, but as we've seen, North Korea likes to take advantage and exploit political crises happening in South Korea. North Korea likes to lampoon South Korea. North Korea likes to deride South Korea's democracy, South Korea's role as a democracy, as a full-fledged, functioning and flourishing democracy, bar these aberrations, okay? And so we need to wait and see. I wouldn't be surprised if North Korea were to issue quite a scathing statement, because this is what it did with the Park Geun-hye scandal, for instance.
And in terms of that statement, what does that mean? Again, who are they trying to speak to?
They're trying to speak to their own North Korean domestic population, but they're also trying to speak to foreign audiences and signal to foreign audiences, okay? Because North Korea wants to put a block, a wedge in the South Korean alliance system with the United States. We've already seen North Korea increase its provocations towards South Korea this year, whether that's through artillery fire or the deployment of balloons filled with refuse and excrement. And these provocations ordinarily, bar yesterday's events and today's ongoing events, would increase this year, are likely to increase this year, in my view. So I think that North Korea will try and capitalize upon this situation for its own benefit.
Edward, what do you think? What will you be watching out for in the next 3 to 4 days? I know we're seeing a lot of protests in the street. Is impeachment now almost a done deal, given what proportions this has taken?
Nothing is a done deal in politics unless it has been done. I think we will be looking out for the development of protests, yes. We will be looking out for further resignations, if this happens, of Yoon's cabinet. And obviously, as you mentioned, we will be looking out for questions of possible impeachment and what this might lead to. Okay, this has shaken up South Korea, I think. Martial law has been revoked, fine, okay, but the long-lasting effects will be clear, because not too long ago, as I have mentioned, in very recent memory, South Korea also had their president impeached, okay, Park Geun-hye. So we need to bear this in mind. I will also say, just to conclude, that the opposition party, the leftist party, led by Lee Jae-myung, we must remember and that actually they have their own agenda as well, and we cannot accept their view uncritically. We must look at both sides with criticism and skepticism. It's very important here. We must be nuanced.
Edward, thanks so much. Edward Howell there, Korea Foundation Fellow at Chatham House's Asia Pacific program. Up next, Bloomberg Brief. Danny Berger and Manish Krani in New York will follow very closely the developments in France, South Korea, and of course the U.S. This is Bloomberg.